Welcome to On the Pot podcast, or I guess On the Pot YouTube, where I tell you stories while sitting on top of my Thetford cassette toilet as I currently sit at an apartment complex parked in my van, staying at my friend's place in the southern USA. I've been living on the road for 10 months. It's crazy to me. So I started end of last April to like the beginning of May is when I first hit the road, and I started out on the west coast in Oregon and Washington, and since then I have traveled across the northern US, down the east coast, and now I'm exploring the south, and it's been just such an incredible journey so far. And I've got a couple really interesting tales to tell, and one of them started in Telluride, Colorado. Telluride, Colorado was one of the first places I went when I hit the road. I started in Oregon, looped around Oregon and Washington to test everything out, and when everything was working, I had to skedaddle over to Moab, Utah, to my friend's baby shower. But Moab, Utah was absolutely miserable. It was so hot there, and the stress of hanging out in that area while also having 2 cats in the van was extremely real, and I would not recommend that to anybody. Lucky for me, my cats were able to stay in her house during that time in the cold air conditioning. But from there, my first and foremost goal was to get out of the summer heat. And so I took one look at a map of Colorado showing the different temperatures of the area, and I saw this place called Telluride, somewhere nestled up in some mountains, that was supposed to be about 70 degrees for the next week. And I'm like, I'm going there. I've heard of Telluride, but I've never been. I don't know what's there. But you know what? I'm starting my adventure. This is the first real decision I get to make in starting my journey. And so I picked Telluride and I started driving. And when I got there, it ended up being a really special place. I have this tradition, and it actually goes all the way back to when I went to boarding school for my junior and senior year. And I wanted to dress up. And so my friends and I believe it was on Thursdays, all of us would dress up in really fancy outfits when we went to class. So most of my friends were guys wearing suits and such, and I'd wear dresses. And I always had a lot of fun doing that. When I went to college, I found one after the other of like the most beautiful ballroom gowns at secondhand stores, and I couldn't keep my hands off them. My mom raised me to appreciate a beautiful ballroom gown. And so I would buy them, and then I'd have no occasion to wear them, and I got really bummed out. And so I decided to make an opportunity to wear them, and I gathered up all my friends. So we'd dress up in our finest, and we'd go out to the diviest bar in town, and mostly, honestly, we'd just sit around a table on our phones and share memes with each other and giggle and have a drink and people watch. And honestly, it was such a wonderful time. Sometimes we'd do some dancing, which made it even better. But it was just so much fun, and I decided to carry on the tradition into van life. So on Friday nights, and I call it Fancy Fridays, I would dress up. I brought a couple nice outfits with me on the road. I would dress up and I would go out, and as a kind of avenue to explore the towns I was in. And something that almost always happens when I do a Fancy Friday, when I'm by myself, somebody starts talking to me. And this night ended up being wild. So it was my first Friday in Telluride, Colorado. And I had gone earlier that week into a little cafe called the Phoenix Bean. And yes, I did go into the Phoenix Bean because it was named Phoenix. I wanted, my name. I thought it was cool. So I went into the Phoenix Bean Cafe, and it ended up being this little cafe I really enjoyed. And something said that they had live music on Friday nights. So I decided to go. And so I dressed up, and this night I was wearing slacks, a vest that had a lacy back and the vest top. I believe I was wearing my shiny silver button-up shirt. I was wearing a hat, kind of noir detective sort of hat. and I was wearing a full military tailored jacket, which I found at a vintage store. It fits me like a glove. And so that was the outfit with some boots. But I looked very, very fancy. You know, Fancy Friday. And I go, and I know people are gonna stare. They always do. And I'm used to that, and I don't mind that. If I have at least one person see me and think, you know, well, maybe I can go out and dress in what makes me happy too, then I've done my job. I love the opportunity to potentially encourage other people to be more of themselves, and so if that means I get a few weird side eyes or stares, I don't mind. And so I walk into Phoenix Bean and everybody's just dressed casual in their, you know, in their Friday casual, and I walk in and I go up to the bar to order some dinner, and I end up in line behind these two ladies, and they immediately just started chatting me up, and I'd never seen them before in my life, and there's these two ladies from Texas, and they started telling me all about where they came from, how they always come and visit Telluride because it's such a wonderful place to vacation to. Absolutely wonderful people. And they ended up inviting me to sit by them. So I order my food, and I kind of honestly stand by them because there's this like center bar sort of table, and that's where I stopped. We all stood together at the center bar kind of table, and we're all chatting. They're telling me about Texas. I'm telling them about my travels. They're asking about my getup. And while we're talking, this kind of older couple walks in and kind of starts joining in on the conversation, starts talking to the ladies, and the ladies, you know, point me out to them. And this couple is actually a local couple from Telluride, Colorado. They've been there for, I don't know, 40 years or more. And the entire group of us become friends. So I'm hanging out with them for the evening. The older couple ends up retiring earlier into the night. And when the live music ends, the couples from Austin, so they actually had their husbands weren't there yet. They invited their husbands to join us, and they all took me to the gondola in Telluride because apparently it runs until like 11 p.m. and it's free. And so all 5 of us band together and we all go onto the night gondola heading up the mountain, and you get to look down the mountain and look at all the lights coming from the city. It's a small city, but it's beautiful. And so the view from that night gondola was absolutely magical. And those ladies were absolutely wonderful. And I'm so glad they took me on the little escapade up to I think it's Mountain View or something, up into the mountain place and then down again. So that was the start of the magical journey. But where it gets more magical is it returns to that local couple. The local couple texts me and they're like, hey, would you like to come to our house for dinner? And I was a little iffy, you know, they're basically strangers, but something I forgot to mention was when all of us were hanging out at the Phoenix Bean, I ended up video chatting my mom, and she met everybody, including the local couple, so I was feeling a little bit more comfortable, you know, not total strangers. They met my mom, not a stranger anymore at that point, and they invite me over for dinner, and I'm like, you know, this is kind of why I wanted to hit the road. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to have wonderful experiences and not always be worried and scared like they tell you to be. And so I accepted. I decided I'm gonna go and have this dinner. So I believe that's the next week on a Thursday. I go and I have dinner with them, and they made salmon and asparagus. The only time in my life that I have liked asparagus. I hate that stuff with a burning passion of 1,000 suns, and that asparagus was delicious. She is an amazing cook. That aside, and their son was there. So those two and their son and I all have dinner together, and they start telling me about the town. So he is a lawyer and she is a property manager for the area of Telluride, and they've been there for years. And they're just the most delightful people, just so sweet. telling me all about the stories of the town, a little bit of the crazy things that happen in town. But I have a wonderful dinner with them. And then they invite me over again the next week. And throughout that time, I invite them out and we go get like drinks and we go get coffees. And I end up hanging out with them throughout my entire 3 weeks I spent in Telluride, Colorado. But what was really funny is on that first night of that first dinner, at the end, the husband takes a $1 bill, rips it in half, and hands me half the $1 bill. And I'm like, what's going on? Why is he giving me half of a $1 bill? And he's like, I'll give you the other half when you come back. And so I take my half of the $1 bill and I hoard it like a dragon. And when I came back the next time, I brought it with me and gave it to him. You know, it's a little tradition to show good faith. So that was really special. I thought it was really cute. I actually ended up keeping my half of the dollar bill, and I have it in a little container, just special to me. So I ended up becoming really close friends with them, and they ended up starting to introduce me as their daughter. So these people, like I said, they've lived in town for 40 years. They've got 2 kids. Everybody knows them. You know, they're a distinct part of the town. And so we went to another live music event the next week all together. We're all hanging out together, and it's a small town. It has about 2,000 people. So everybody knows everybody. And I'm getting little glances from people. I'm dressed up in my fancy Friday best again, this time in a big red velvet gown. And people are giving me looks because they recognize the couple I'm with, but they don't recognize me. And so people are coming over like, oh, who's this with you? And they're like, oh, this is our daughter, Phoenix. The look of confusion on these people's faces as they backtrack and try to think through their minds and think, how is it that these people have been here for 40 years and we don't recognize one of their children? It was priceless. It was absolutely freaking fantastic to see the confusion and the kind of like stuttering and the like, what have I missed sort of looks on these people's faces. And nobody questioned it. Not one person was like, your daughter or something, like, not one of them. They all just took it on good faith that I'm apparently these people's daughter. The next day, I am sitting on a bench just watching the street. It's a really pretty area. You've got a view of the mountains right at the end. And a lady walks past and is like, oh, hey, you're so-and-so's daughter. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's me. Did you see me last night or something? So not only did they call me their daughter, but people were truly accepting it. They were recognizing me as those folks' daughter. They lived here for so many years, and oh man, it was funny. So that was entertaining within itself, as I became the daughter of these people that I just met on a whim in Telluride. But what ended up being really special, they let me park in their driveway when I would park in town, which was nice because Telluride has some public parking, but it fills up pretty well and you can't stay overnight there. So if I wanted to stay overnight in town, like go out and have a drink at a bar, they let me park in their driveway, which was really, really kind. But what kind of was the crowning moment of all of it was on my last day in Telluride, Colorado. They were having a festival. And, well, actually, we're going to back up for a quick second. For that festival, I was actually sitting on a different park bench. I looked around and I noticed somebody's phone had been left behind on the bench. So I picked it up thinking, you know, somebody's going to come back for it. I sat there for like 10 minutes and nobody came back for it. So I look up on my phone and I find that there's like a tourism room building, something that you can go in and talk to people. So I was like, all right, I'll take it there. They'll know who to direct me to find this phone's home. And it was closed. So I walk around some more and I come back and it's still closed for lunch. It took a lot longer than I would expect a lunch, and way over an hour. And so I'm walking around with this stranger's phone. And the one thing I thought to do before I left that bench was I had a little sketchbook with me, and I tore out a piece of the paper and I wrote down my number, and I said, if you lost something, call me. And I wrapped it around, you know how the benches have those slats. I kind of wrapped it around it so hopefully the wind wouldn't catch it and take it off. So whoever came back looking would hopefully find it. Well, I got a phone call. Hey, I lost a phone. Do you have it? I'm like, yeah, I've got your phone. And so I'm talking to these people. They're like, hey, it's our friend's phone. We'll come pick it up from you. I'm like, can you describe it? And they described it. And so, you know, confirmed that it was actually them. And then they were asking, like, you know, where are you? Where can I find it? I'm like, well, I'm out in this parking lot. Can you come and meet me? And they're like, wait, what's your name? And I'm like, oh, I'm Phoenix. And they're like, oh yeah, you're the person staying with that family. I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. So, you know, word keeps spreading wherever I'm at. So I'm hanging on to this phone. The people come, drop by and pick it up. And there's been this festival that just started in Telluride, a music festival. And I think it's called The Ride. And they gave me a 10-day pass band to the festival as a thank you, because that phone that I found apparently belonged to one of the drummers. So that was really, really cool. And I did get to go to some of those music events. But the last day in Telluride was the last day of that festival. And so I had waited for some mail to come in, and this has been the most frustrating part of van life for the entire trip has been mail. My mail service is amazing. USPS is not amazing. And so even though I'm getting good service on the receiving end of my mail, when it gets actually shipped, it has been late almost every single time. And so I'd been waiting on some mail, and it finally came on this last day, which also happened to be the last day of the Ride Festival. And they have they set up an entire, like, what is it called? It's not an auditorium, it's not a deck. It is, you guys will probably figure out what word I'm talking about, but you know, the band stands on it. And they set up one of those in the middle of the street, and they close down the street, and everybody comes together in a big old crowd, and you watch the music. So my last day there, I decided to stay a little bit longer so I can see some of that live music. And the couple, the older couple that has been accepting me as their daughter, they come with me, and we all kind of get to enjoy it together. Well, when I give them the hugs and saying, you know what, it's time for me to go, the husband pulls out a $100 bill, and he tears it in half. He gives half to me, and I knew I get to keep that, and that's my little memory. And maybe, you know, hopefully I'll make it back to Telluride, and I'll get to give him that half of the $100 bill again. So Telluride was pretty magical. If there was a place I was going to stay, it would have been that, but it was far too early on my journey, and there were far too many adventures still to be had. So I'm hoping if any of you guys are going out on the road that you find a similar magic somewhere. If you have, let me know where. I'd love to go there. Thank you. Have a good night.